I've been keeping aquariums and aquarium fish for quite a long time. In fact, some people call me an old timer, and I do have the gray hair that goes along with being an old timer. So what I wanted to do today is make a video and talk about my 8 tips that I think will help a lot of you in keeping your fish, both saving money, saving time, making it more enjoyable, and even saving the life of some of your fish. Hey fish friends, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Zenzo from Tazawa Tanks. Now I gotta say that sometimes I make videos where I'm just kind of grinding through the material to get the video out, and other times I'm super excited and hyped about a topic. Well, this is one of those times that I'm super excited about this topic, so it might come out in my energy or how quickly I'm speaking, but I do enjoy talking about stuff like this because I do enjoy helping other people, and hopefully something that I share with you today will make your hobby better for you. Now before I continue, I want to ask you real quickly to like this video if you have not done so already, and also subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already. Now that I've got all that begging and pleading out of the way, let's get on with the video. Now the first tip that I want to give all of you is something that's really easy. Pretty much anyone can have access to that, and that is getting a timer for your aquarium. Now there are lots of different timers out there. There are some that are built into power strips. There are others that are just, individual timers like these. You've got the old school dial type that you can get for anywhere from $3 to $5 at a hardware store. There are digital kinds that you can kind of program, and there are things like this, which is a smart plug that you would plug into an outlet. You would plug your device into this, and this is connected to your phone or device through Wi-Fi. So that way you can control everything from your phone, which I love to do. In fact, every aquarium down here is controlled by these smart plugs. I can control my lights. I can turn them on and off as I please. I can program them to come on and off at a certain time of day. So it really does help. Now, as far as helping you guys, what it can do is a couple of things. One, it will help to control the amount of time that your lights are on. So that does a couple of things. Well, it does a few things. But number one, if you have your lights on for too long, you're probably going to be growing excess algae in your aquarium. So algae needs light and nutrients. If you can control one or both of those, then you'll have less of it. The other thing that it will do is it will help your plant growth. So if you have plants in your aquarium, which you should, which we'll talk about shortly, if you have plants in your aquarium, they obviously need light for photosynthesis. If your lights are on not long enough, then they're not getting enough light. So this is a way for you to control and manage that, very easily, either just by programming in the dial or using something a little bit more advanced like programming the actual app in your phone. Another thing that's important as far as the length of time that the lights are on is it could stress fish out. So for example, if you have lights on your aquarium and you leave in the afternoon and go out to dinner and you come home and you're super tired and you forget to turn the lights off on your aquarium and the lights stay on all night long, well, imagine you coming home and being tired and exhausted or whatever kind of day you had and having the lights on all night long in your bedroom. You're probably not going to have a good night's sleep. And the same thing for the fish. You're probably not going to get the same amount of rest. They might be a little bit stressed out and or confused that the sun didn't go down, right? So having those lights go off at a certain time every day is going to ensure that your fish are less stressed out and get the proper rest that they need. My next tip, and we kind of just talked about it in the timer one, is plants. Now, I used to not keep a lot of plants in my aquariums because I was doing a lot of African cichlids and I was having a hard time keeping plants alive because they would kill them. And even though I still keep a lot of African cichlids, I've found plants that do well in African cichlid aquariums, or I found other ways of keeping plants like pothos in the back of the filter, etc. Now, plants do a few things. So obviously they help in making the aquariums look nicer. So you have that green foliage in there. You have that greenery that kind of helps with the aesthetic of the aquarium. It also helps in having the fish more comfortable in the aquarium. So if you have plants in there, a lot of times most fish will feel more comfortable because they'll have places to hide and either hide from other fish or hide from other things that might frighten them. So having that cover in them will make them feel more comfortable. It's also a great place for microorganisms. So if you have, baby fish, fry as we call them, a small fish in your aquarium, it's a place where microorganisms can kind of gather, and those baby fish or smaller fish will be able to have a place to kind of graze and eat that microfauna. And probably the biggest benefit of having plants in your aquarium, and the reason why I try to have them in every single tank that I have, excluding the ones with salt, is because they help in reducing the amount of nitrates in the aquarium. They basically help to filter your aquarium and make the water cleaner, so to speak, by removing those nutrients from the water so the fish have waste, and that waste is converted, ammonia nitrate into nitrate, and the plants absorb that as their fertilizer, thus making the water cleaner and more inhabitable for the fish. My next tip is the most economical, cheapest, whatever you want to call it, tip that I'm giving you today, and that is using a wet erase pen. Now this looks very much like a dry erase pen that you would use like on a dry erase board. The difference is this is a wet erase pen, meaning that if you use a dry erase pen and you wipe it with your hand or anything dry, that will come off. So you write on a glass with a dry erase pen, you take a towel or your shirt or whatever, you rub up against it, and it will come off. The wet erase pen doesn't do that. It actually takes water or something damp to come off, to take the ink off. So I can brush up against an aquarium or anything that this is written on and it won't come off until I take a damp towel or cloth and wipe it off. What I do with this is I write information on all of my aquariums. For me, I write the date of the last water change. So when I do a water change, as I'm completing that water change and wiping everything down and making sure everything's all set and good to go, I'll just bust out my little wet erase marker and write the date on the side of the tank, somewhere inconspicuous. And that way, when I walk into this room, or if I go into any of my other rooms in my house and look at an aquarium, I'll see the date and say, oh, now I remember I last did a water change on this date. Now, yes, you want to test for water, and we'll talk about that later, but this is just a very quick and easy way for you to remember about things that you have done to your aquarium. Maybe it might be something about when you last added medication, when your fish last spawned, when you first introduced that fish into the aquarium. Anything that's important to you as far as remembering something that's going on in that aquarium, it's very easy to just write it on the side of the tank, and it's very easy to come off. It's not going to stain or anything. It just comes off with water and you'll never know it was there. But it's a great way to track your water changes or anything like that. Now that last tip was probably the easiest thing that I could tell you to do and super inexpensive. This is going to be the biggest labor-saving tip that I can give you. And that is using something to extract water out of your aquariums that's not just a siphon in a bucket. I happen to use these kind of things right here, and I've got a few of these back from my aquarium service business. So I would use these professionally when I would go to a healthcare center, someone's office, etc., servicing the aquarium. I would bring a few of these with me so that I could do water changes. All you do is it's a submersible pump in a tube. All I would do is I would drop the submersible pump into the aquarium. I can set the desired height, plug it in. Obviously, I would run the tube to a drain or a garbage can or whatever I was using to catch the water, usually a drain, and I will just plug it in and walk away. So in this situation, all these aquariums, I can just drop in my submersible pump, run the end of the tube to the drain, plug it in, and walk away and come back in 20 minutes or whatever and see that the water has dropped to the desired level. So it makes it super, super easy when you're doing water changes, especially in larger aquariums where you don't want to sit there with a siphon and a bucket and do 5 gallons at a time, which is arduous. Nobody wants to do that. You're going to spill water all over the place. So having something like this is super helpful. Now you can use things like a Python, and I do use a Python upstairs in my living room for a couple of my aquariums there. And I use that mostly for filling, but I can use it for draining as well. Now the Python does have a couple of disadvantages. One, it doesn't flow as much water as a pump, and you're also kind of relying on gravity. So it's a siphon with a super long hose, obviously, that has an attachment that can attach onto your faucet. But it needs gravity to draw water out of your aquarium unless you have it connected to your faucet and you can run the water and suck it out that way, but then you're kind of wasting tap water. So it can be a little bit wasteful. It doesn't work as quickly, but you're not having to plug anything into a power outlet, so it is free as far as not using any energy. And in that same category, I would also say to use a hose to refill. So I mentioned having that Python that I can connect to a faucet, and that's how I refill aquariums upstairs. So instead of me carrying buckets back and forth from the sink to the aquariums, again, 3, 4, 5 gallons at a time, I can just run that Python right to the aquarium from the faucet, turn it on, even matching cold and warm water to make it perfect, and run that right in the aquarium and do my dechlorinating and not have to carry anything. So it's very helpful. Down here I use a hose that's attached to my sink over here, but again, having something to refill and drain is going to make your life so much easier. Your back's going to thank you. Your muscles, well, they're not going to get a workout, but there's other ways of getting that done. So yeah, try to use either a hose or some kind of removal device like a pump to help you with your water changes. Now, we've talked about cheap things that help you. We've talked about things that will help you as far as your back and labor. This one's going to help your pocket, your wallet, your bank account, and that's using air. Now, there are a lot of different ways of filtering an aquarium. You can use canister filters, hang-on-the-back filters, internal filters, sump filters, Matten filters, sponge filters, box filters. I'm sure there's other filters that I can't think of right now, but there are a lot of different ways of filtering your aquarium. Most of those require a lot of power. So if you have a canister or a hang-on-the-back filter attached to your aquarium, that thing is running all of the time, and it's usually only one per aquarium. Now, if you use air, you only need one air pump to do multiple aquariums. So if you have 4 or 5 aquariums, all you need is one, mid-size or larger air pump that doesn't draw that much power because of how efficient it is. And you can basically filter all of those aquariums with one small air pump. So instead of having 5 or 6 things plugged in, like 5 hang-on-the-back filters or 5 canister filters, you would just have that one air pump plugged in and then just run an air line to each aquarium through some kind of gang valve or something, and you can filter all of your aquariums just with that one little device. Now for me, I have all of my aquariums running on air. I do have a couple of canister filters down here, one in this African cichlid tank. Even though I do have air in there, I just like having that extra filter. It just makes it easier for me. And then I have one in my Indian mudskipper tank because it creates a waterfall. So I do have air and sponges in both of those, but I do have those two. But everything else down here is running on air, meaning that I've got one air pump. It's a larger air pump. One air pump plugged in to the wall, so not a bunch of plugs plugged in. There's not a lot of energy being drawn, so my energy bill's not as high as it would be if I were running, canister filters and hang on the backs on every single one of these. And I just run air lines from that central air pump to all of my aquariums, and that drives either sponge filters or box filters or my moving media filters, my Zis filters. This is why when you look at someone's fish room, or if you go to an aquarium store or fish store and you look at their filtration, pretty much 99% of the time they are using air to filter their aquariums because it is very economical. My next tip, well, not very fun and not a fun topic to really talk about. It could save the life of your fish, and that is to have medications readily available. Now for me, I keep all of my meds handy all the time. I've got a whole basically shelf full of different medications for my fish so that if something were to happen, I don't have to wait. I have medications right away. So what you don't want to happen in your situation is you don't want to be looking at your aquarium, observe a fish, and see that there's an injury or some kind of parasite or something like that, or your fish is, acting erratically and you can tell that something is wrong, or it might be a situation where you got in some new fish and you want to treat them for parasites, things like that. What you don't want to do is be in a situation where you have that fish needs meds, but you don't have them. Either you have to wait till the next morning when the store opens up, or in a lot of cases, there's not a store close by. Maybe the closest fish store is 2 or 3 hours away. So you do a lot of your shopping online. And if you are to order that fish medication, it might take 2, 3, 4, 5 days for it to get to you, depending on where you live and who you order from. So having those medications on hand is critical. What you don't want is you don't want to have a situation where you see an injury on your fish, you know that it needs to get addressed, or you see some type of bacterial infection and you see that fuzzy stuff growing on it and you know, hey, I need to take care of this right away. It can't wait 3 or 4 days for you to get those meds. So having those medications on hand can be the difference between your fish living and it not making. So think about the type of medications that you might need, and think about bacterial infections and internal parasites, ick, things like that, things that we see quite often, and think about the type of meds that you should have on hand. Now I know that some of you watching this video might live in an area where medication is not available. It might be illegal because of the country that you live in, or they just don't have them available. So think about what you have available to you that can treat fish and have that on hand. So for example, aquarium salt in a lot of cases can be very helpful. So just make sure that you always have some aquarium salt handy, so if you do have a situation where there's some kind of parasite or injury, that you can treat it with salt and that you have it available to you. My next tip, it's also an economical tip. This is also something that can save you money, and that is retaining heat. Now, for most of us out there that keep aquarium fish, we keep tropical fish, most of us. Some of us might have some cool water fish, but most people keep tropical fish. And we're always thinking about how to have the right temperature of water for our aquarium fish, and usually it's anywhere from 74 to 80 degrees or anywhere in between, depending on the type of fish that you keep. You might have something like discus that might need, 81, 82 degrees. You might have something that needs cooler water, but most people are keeping fish in that range between 74 to 80 degrees. Now, that can be expensive. A couple things. You've got to put heaters in your aquarium. You have to make sure that you have the right heater for your aquarium, and that's the right size, and that's plugged into the, the outlet, and that's something that's being, it's on the grid and it's drawing energy all the time. So basically it's just every time that heater kicks on, it's money leaving your wallet, right? So what you want to do is think about how you can mitigate some of those losses by retaining the heat in your aquarium. Now, there are things to consider like glass versus acrylic. Acrylic is a lot better at regulating temperature and insulating aquariums versus glass. So acrylic doesn't dissipate heat as easily as glass does, where glass, that heat transfer happens a lot easier. So if you are in a situation where you really need to, think about, keeping a temperature, where it needs to be, you might want to consider acrylic. The other thing that you can do is you can actually insulate your aquarium. So I've actually done that before. So down here, this room is actually a basement, which is attached to my garage. And years ago, before it was this, cool, warm, but this cool looking studio that we've built here with insulated walls and everything like that, I was just keeping a few tanks down here as quarantine tanks and breeding tanks and stuff like that. And I would actually insulate all of my aquariums on every side except for the front viewing panel. So I would insulate the sides, the back, the bottom. I would put it on like insulating foam, the kind you would use like on the siding of a house. And I would make sure that all of my aquariums had lids. Sometimes I even had kind of heavy duty lids on there to retain the heat and to keep it in there. Now I did have heaters in there at that time, but the heaters weren't having to go on and off as often because the temperature wasn't fluctuating as much because I had insulation on those aquariums. So if you are in a situation where you're trying to regulate temperature and keep it warm or even keep it cool, having some insulation will help, and also having a lid on your aquarium will make a big difference. And that's probably where you'll get the biggest difference as far as temperature. So in this room, most of my aquariums have lids, but I do have a couple that don't have lids on them. They're open top aquariums. And even by touch, I can touch one tank that's right next to another. If I put my fingers in one with a lid versus one that doesn't have a lid, it's very noticeable as far as the temperature difference between the two. So having your aquariums insulated on the sides, on the bottom, on the back, and even on top can make a big difference. In a lot of cases, you might not even need a heater if your room is at a decent temperature and if you have an aquarium light on your tank. So as an example, if you have, let's say, a 20-gallon aquarium in your room and your room is always 70 degrees, something like that, right around room temperature, if you insulate the bottom, the sides, the back, and have a lid on, a nice tight-fitting lid, and then you have those lights on your aquarium, then your aquarium water will be warmer than the ambient temperature of the room. Your aquarium might end up being 73, 74 degrees, and you may not need a heater depending on the fish that you're keeping because the lights are generating heat and the lid is on tight and that heat is not escaping. On other things that you have might also be generating heat, like your anything that's plugged in, power heads and filters, things like that, that can also generate heat and increase the temperature of your tank. If you have multiple tanks like I do, lots of them, then consider heating the room instead of heating individual tanks. So for me, I have no heaters in any of these tanks, and all the tanks are right around, well, it depends on where they are in the room, but anywhere from as low as like 76 or 77 degrees for some of the open top tanks on the bottom to like 80, 81 degrees depending on where they are. So every tank down here is warm enough, and none of them have heaters in there. I just have the room, it's insulated, and they stay warm like that. And the last tip, last but not least, again, these are not in any particular order, is to have a way of testing the water in your aquarium. So there's things like this master test kit. You can get something super fancy and super expensive like this and not very easy to use, but very thorough. Or you can do what I do now, and I just use these test strips because it just makes my life so much easier as far as testing water because it's so fast and also very accurate. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a way of testing the water parameters. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have a situation where something goes wrong and you go to ask advice, whether it's local fish store or a friend of yours that keeps fish or on a forum, things like that. You'll want to know what the water parameters are and not just guess, right? Or you don't want to ask for help, and then someone says, well, tell me your water parameters, and you say, I don't know. I do a water change, every week, and my fish seem okay, and then all of a sudden they're not okay. You want to be able to test for pH, you want to be able to test for ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, hardness, things like that, right? So having a way of testing your water is going to be very important. Now there are, expensive kits, there's, middle price kits, there's things like test strips, but having a way of testing your water is critical in understanding what's going on in your aquarium. In my experience, the test strips are much, much easier for most people. The reason why is you're more likely to actually test the water with one of these versus doing a master kit. Now, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 aquariums, then having a master kit is not that much more time consuming because you're only doing it for 1 or 2 tanks at a time. So it's not that big of a deal. But if you have 5, 6, 10, 20, 30 tanks, doing the master kit can be a real pain in the butt. But having something that's as simple as unscrewing the cap, plopping in a strip, pulling it out in a couple seconds, letting it sit for a few more seconds, and then reading the results can be a lifesaver. And you can do, a bunch of tanks in a few minutes versus an hour or so to test a bunch of tanks. So anyway, whatever way that you have to test your aquariums and test the water parameters, make sure that you have a test kit available. Now, I know that this was a long video. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. And don't forget, please do subscribe. Please like this video. I would love to read down below in the comments if any of these tips and tricks and suggestions that I've given you are things that you already do, or maybe they're things that you've never thought of before, and if you plan on trying any of these. Maybe there are other tips and tricks that I have not thought of, or maybe I've thought of them but didn't include them in this video, so comment down below on those as well. That's all I had for now. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.